Darren was a regular commuter, taking the evening train home after a long shift at the factory. The trains were always crowded, filled with tired workers and students heading home for the night. But tonight was different. A thick fog had rolled in, covering the city in a cold, damp blanket. The usual buzz of the station was quieter, the fog swallowing up the sounds of footsteps and voices. Darren arrived at the station just as the last train of the night was pulling in. The headlights pierced through the fog, casting eerie beams of light through the mist. As the train came to a stop, the doors slid open with a soft "shh". Darren stepped on board, noticing that the carriage was almost empty, except for a few scattered passengers. He found a seat near the middle of the carriage, grateful for the peace and quiet after a long day. As the train began to move, Darren settled into his seat, staring out the window. The fog was so thick that he could not see anything outside, just a swirling mass of grey. He checked his watch. 11:30 p.m. The train should have been crowded, but it felt strangely deserted. Darren glanced around the other passengers. Across from his seat, a man in a dark suit, his face hidden behind a newspaper. A few sits down quietly. An elderly woman knit quietly, her needles clicking softly in the silence. Farther down the carriage, a teenage girl listened to a music through her headphones, bobbing her head slightly to the beat. As the train sped through the night, Darren noticed something odd. The stations they passed were unfamiliar. He had been taking this route for years, but he did not recognize any of the stops. The signs were old and faded, the platforms crumbling and overgrown with weeds. The train wasn't slowing down either. It just sped past each station as if it has no intention of stopping. Darren felt a chill run down his spine. He tried to shake off the feeling, telling himself he was just tired and imagining things. But as the train continued on, the atmosphere grew more unsettling. The lights in the carriage flickered, and the temperature seemed to drop. Darren pulled his coat tighter around himself, but the cold seemed to seep into his bones. He decided to ask the man across from him if he knew what was going on. But when Darren looked up, he froze. The man was gone, leaving his newspaper behind on the seat. Darren hadn't seen him get up, hadn't heard any movement. It was as if he had simply vanished. Darren's heart began to race. He looked around the carriage again. The elderly woman was sitting neat, her needles clicking away, but she did not seem to notice anything wrong. The teenage girl was gone too. Her seat was empty, the headphones laying on the seat. Panic started to rise in Darren's chest. He stood up, looked down the length of the carriage. It was completely empty, now except for the old woman. He walked over to her, his footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. "Excuse me," Darren said, his voice trembling slightly. "Do you know where we are?" The woman did not respond. She just kept kneeling, her eyes focused on her work. Darren reached out to tap her on the shoulder, but as soon as his hand made contact, she stopped. Slowly, she looked up at him, her eyes blank and lifeless. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Darren stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. Suddenly, the train skidded to a halt, throwing Darren off balance. He grabbed onto a nearby seat to steady himself. The door slid open, but when Darren looked outside, he saw nothing but darkness. The fog had thinned, turning the world outside into a void. He could not even see the platform. Darren hesitated. He knew he had to get off the train, but something was telling him to stay put. The train was silent now. The only sound of the soft hum of the lights overhead. He took a deep breath and stepped toward the door, peering out into the darkness. As he stood there, he heard a faint sound, like whispers carried on the wind. He could not make out the words, but the tone was unsettling, almost pleading. Darren's instincts screamed at him to stay on the train, to wait for the next stop, but something compelled him to stay into the darkness. The moment he stepped off the train, the door slid shut behind him with a loud hiss. He turned around, but the train was already moving, disappearing into the fog. Darren was left standing on an abandoned platform, surrounded by nothing but darkness. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. Darren felt a presence around him, something cold and unseen. He turned in circles, trying to see where the whispers were coming from, but the fog was too thick. Panic surged through him as he realized he was alone, completely alone in this strange, deserted place. Suddenly the fog began to lift, just enough for Darren to see his surroundings. The platform was crumbling, the tracks rusted and overgrown. The station was in ruins, as if it hadn't been used in decades. Darren's breath caught in his throat as he realizes where he was. This station did not exist. It was as if he had stepped back in time to a place that shouldn't be. The whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. Darren looked down the tracks, hoping to see the train coming back, but there was nothing, just an endless stretch of darkness. He was trapped. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. There was no way out, no way back to the world he knew. The train had taken him somewhere else, a place outside of his time and reality. Darren's heart raced as he frantically looked around, searching for any sign of life, any way to escape. But there was nothing, just the fog, the darkness, and the cold, empty station. Darren sat down on the edge of the platform, his head in his hands. He didn't know how long he sat there, but eventually the fog began to close in again, wrapping around him like a sword. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, but Darren did not move. He knew now that he was lost, lost in a place that no one would ever find. And as the fog swallowed him, Darren realizes with a cold, sneaking feeling that the Phantom Express was never meant to take him home.